Good morning, students. In today's lecture, we would be discussing about the remaining portion related with the anatomy of the lateral ventricle. So, in the previous lecture, we had discussed about its definition, its location. We had talked about its various parts. We had discussed about the central part in detail, that is, its various boundaries, the structures related with the central part of the lateral ventricle, structures forming its walls and floor and roof. We had discussed about the anterior horn, its location, its relations, structures participating in forming its roof and floor, its walls. Now today we will be talking about the remaining parts, that is the posterior horn and the inferior horn. The posterior horn it lies behind the splenium of the corpus callosum. As you can see, it lies behind this the posterior horn, extends into the occipital lobe, and it is directed backwards and medially. In this figure also you can see here the posterior horn. The boundaries, that is the roof and lateral wall, is formed by tapetum fibers of optic radiation. That is part of the optic tract, and it carries the impulses from the retina to the visual cortex located in the occipital lobe. The floor and medial wall is formed by the bulb of posterior horn. The bulb of the posterior horn is raised by forceps major. Forceps major are the fibers related with the corpus callosum. The calcar avus is raised by anterior part of calcarine sulcus. It is a prominence or an involution caused due to the calcarine sulcus, which is a fissure or groove in the caudal end on the medial surface of brain. So these are the two prominences present in the floor and the medial wall of the posterior horn of the lateral ventricle. One is because of the forceps major, that is the fibers of the corpus callosum. Another prominence is the calcar avus, and it is due to this calcar avus is basically because the calcarine sulcus, which is a depression or a groove in the medial surface of the brain at the caudal end. So you can see this is the posterior horn. This portion of the lateral ventricle is the posterior horn, and you can see this is the calcarine sulcus that leads to an prominence or an involution, which is named as calcar avus. Another part of the lateral ventricle is the inferior horn, and that is the largest horn. Its beginning is at the junction of central part with the posterior horn. So where the central part of the lateral ventricle and the posterior horn, they join, from this junction the inferior horn starts and it extends into the temporal lobe. The boundaries, the roof and the lateral wall are formed chiefly by the tapetum, the tail of the caudate nucleus, the strata terminalis, and the amygdaloid body. The amygdaloid body, which is part of the limbic system, which functions mainly, it helps in the regulation of the emotional responses, also helps in decision making and memory. It is one of the structures. It is a nuclei, a cluster of nuclei, and it is located deep and medially within the temporal lobe of the brain. It is connected to various parts of the cerebral cortex, and it influences the emotional states. The floor and the medial wall is related with the collateral eminence, which is raised by the collateral sulcus, and the hippocampus medially. Hippocampus, again, it is a gray matter tissue. It is a ridge which is present in the floor of the lateral ventricle. Functions are emotion control, it helps in motivation, it also helps in memory. Collateral sulcus, it extends from the occipital pole to a short distance within the temporal pole, and it leads to an elongated swelling which is lateral and parallel with the hippocampus. This is known as collateral eminence. The hippocampus is also embedded deeply into the temporal lobe. So these are the various parts we had discussed. They have been underlined here. That is the genu of the corpus callosum, then the septum pellucidum, then the head of the caudate nucleus, strata terminalis, body of the fornix, the thalamus. These are the structures that form the roof, floor, the walls, the various parts of the lateral ventricle. This is a figure. It is trying to show how the caudate nucleus and the amygdaloid body and the various parts of the caudate nucleus are related with the lateral ventricle. This figure also shows the position of the amygdaloid body deeply into the temporal lobe. So it is related with the roof and lateral wall of the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. Another figure that is showing the corpus callosum, the amygdaloid body. So that's all about the anatomy of the lateral ventricle. Thank you so much.